Okay, welcome everyone to today's Google Webmaster Central Office Hours Hangouts. My name is John Mueller. I'm a Webmaster Trends Analyst here at Google in Switzerland, and part of what we do is talk with webmasters and publishers like the ones here in the Hangout and the ones that submitted lots of questions. As always, before we get started, if there are any of you here live in the Hangout who haven't joined these regularly and who has some questions, feel free to jump on in and ask your question now.
Well, it's.
Nope.
I mean, it looks like it's the same panel.
All right. Similar faces every now and then.
I had a question.
All right. Go for it.
Fine. So I've been rooting around and looking for things, and I came across something that talks about when crawling's happening on a website. So say Googlebot comes across pages that say it's got a schedule to go out and gather data, etc. Because we watched this interview between Gary and Eric from Stone Temple the other week, and he was talking about that Googlebot has like a bucket list of URLs that it's going to go out and visit that day. Yeah. So I came across something that talked about if pages get discovered whilst Googlebot's out that are actually more important than a certain threshold. Yeah. Would Googlebot continue to crawl and visit those beyond its original bucket list if they're important enough? So would it not just? So it would.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, sometimes stuff comes up, and we want to make sure that we can pick up the news as quickly as possible. So if there's something new published and we think this is really important, we might go off and crawl that within a couple of minutes. So we wouldn't wait for another cycle or another day to kind of let that get collected. We'd go off and fetch that right away.
So this particular thing that I was reading about was it had two things. One was what they call like soft limits, crawling limits, almost like the allocated schedule for an IP or site or a budget, if you like, yeah. And the other one was like a hard limit, so it was almost like between the two spaces, there's this available spare capacity if they discover anything that actually is of more importance than a certain threshold. Yeah. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. That kind of makes sense there. I mean, it's also not the case that we want to go to the absolute limit of the server capacity every time. So if we think it makes sense to crawl, I don't know, hundreds of URLs now, but we know the server can take a couple of thousand a day, then maybe we'll pick those up the next time. So
did you save it? Do you maybe roll it over, like roll over capacity a little bit, so you can kind of almost bank your budget, so to speak?
Not really, because that would cause problems. So what we try to do with the crawl rate is to make sure that we don't cause problems on the server, so that your site works normally for your normal users as well. So we don't want to go off and say, oh, well, we'll just take all of your server capacity and use it just for Googlebot, and then you won't have any time to actually serve your content to any of the users, because we wouldn't be able to show it in search if we knew that it wouldn't work. So that's something where we try to be reasonable and say, well, this is the limit where we think the server starts slowing down. So we absolutely need to make sure that we're below this limit. And from 0 to somewhere around there, it kind of depends on what we think is worth picking up today.
Okay. All right. Thanks, John.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. Let me run through some of the questions that were submitted. And as always, if any of you have any questions or comments along the way, feel free to jump on in. I guess we have two sections of our site run off of two different CMSs, which we want to replatform. Unfortunately, this can't be done in a straightforward way, and we have to move into a subdomain for 6 months before moving back to our main site. Should we use 301s or 302s? If you're looking for something where you're moving for like a half a year, I'd probably go with 301s just to make sure that things move over a little bit faster. So in practice, we'd probably pick that up properly regardless of which type of redirect you use. But since this is more than like a really temporary situation, I think a 301 would be the right choice here. If I use a robots no index no follow meta tag on a page, will Googlebot still be able to read other markup on that page, like rel canonical, hreflang, mobile alternate, etc.? Yes, we can read the other markup on that page, but I don't know how much that would actually make sense. So specifically, if you're mixing a no index with a rel canonical, you're kind of saying with the canonical that these two pages are equivalent, but at the same time you're saying, well, this page shouldn't be indexed at all. So if they're equivalent, then we shouldn't index the other page either, right? Which probably isn't what you're trying to do there. So as much as possible, what I do there is try to be as straightforward as possible with your markup and make sure that it's not something that can be interpreted in the wrong way. So if you're saying that these pages are equivalent, then if you want them indexed or the content that's on these pages indexed, then make sure they don't have a no index on them. If it's an alternate hreflang and the other page is an index page, then probably you also don't want to have a no index there. So that's something where you should try to be as consistent as possible with your markup so that search engines don't have to try to interpret what it is you're trying to do there. My e-commerce site uses mega site links in a nav bar linking to 300 plus categories. The links are built with JavaScript and don't appear in the source code. These pages don't appear high in the Search Console internal links list and rank poorly. Shall I rebuild them without JavaScript? So if you're linking to 300 different parts of your site, then I suspect we'll be treating them the same if you have them in the static HTML as if you embed them with JavaScript. So that's more of a situation where we don't really understand the connection between the different parts of your website. So instead of thinking about the technology there, I think more about the site architecture with regards to how can you build the site up in a way that you don't link out to this vast collection of different links from every page. With regards to JavaScript or plain HTML, with JavaScript, what happens is we have to render the pages first to be able to pick up the links. But once we've rendered the pages, and if the links are embedded without a nofollow, then we'll treat them the same as any normal static HTML link. So there's kind of this slightly longer time for us to actually pick up those links, which might be, I don't know, maybe a day, maybe half a day. So it's not weeks, but just slightly longer than just being having to pick up the static HTML page. But apart from that, they're essentially equivalent. So if you think your site works well or works best with JavaScript navigation or with a general JavaScript kind of framework, then that should theoretically work for us. You can double check that with the fetch and render tool in Search Console to make sure that we can actually render those pages properly, that we can actually recognize that there are actually links there. The tricky part there is that the fetch and render tool shows you a screenshot of what the page looks like in the end. It doesn't tell you what the HTML code was that was actually picked out from there. So you might need to experiment a little bit with maybe adding some JavaScript code to your pages to display some of the kind of the DOM that's generated from the JavaScript itself.
John,
yes.
can I? Sorry.
Sure.
Can I just ask, just to reverse back a little bit to that canonicalization question? Again, going back to the interview between Gary and Eric on Stone Temple the other week, Gary said, "Oh, you can pretty much canonicalize to any page, yeah," and that's exactly what he said. But my understanding was that the URLs had to be really near equivalent values. So you mentioned about the no index and the index being not equivalent. So because I tested the no index versus index thing, and that was an absolute disaster. So at what point does Google? Because I remember you said actually Googlebot is likely to ignore it if they're not near equivalent. They'll think it'll think that you've actually made a mistake. Yeah, so it'll just ignore the canonicalization. And that interview with Gary and Eric kind of confused me a little bit because it made me think, well, actually, at what point will Googlebot begin to ignore the canonicalization? Yeah, where does that tip in? Yeah, where does it? Because it's only a hint, isn't it? A canonical tag,
Yeah.
rather than an actual directive. So, what point? Is it the other signals? If the other signals all say this is a mistake, then Googlebot will ignore it. If all the other signals say, so internal link structure, etc., say, well, actually, this is what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, it's not something where we have an absolute hard limit where we'd say, well, 3 out of 5 words on the page have to be the same. But we do try to look at the content and the various signals that we have there to figure out, does this make sense or does this not make sense? So there are things from a content point of view that we sometimes look at where we see, well, these pages are clearly completely different, so maybe we shouldn't treat them as a canonical. With regards to other signals that we might look at specifically is, for example, if we see a lot of different URLs actually have a rel canonical to one single page, then we might assume that maybe there's a mistake here, that the canonical is set up to the home page, or that I don't know, you're trying to use the canonical as a way of handling 404s, which is probably not the best tool there. So it's kind of a collection of different things. By default, we would probably say, well, if you tell us it's a canonical, we'll try to follow it. We're not, or our algorithms are not set up to question everything that webmasters do. So we'll try to follow it as much as possible. But if we do recognize that probably it's a mistake, then we'll skip it.
So if somebody just 301, oh, not 301, canonicalizes like 500,000 URLs to a category, but the canonicalized pages are actually pretty weak, that's probably a bad idea in the first place.
I mean, that can make sense to try to clean things up, but it might happen that we just say, oh, this is a soft 404 page, and we'll just drop them completely, which the end result will be very similar in that we'll have the category pages indexed and the other pages not indexed.
Right, okay. That just confused me, that was all. Thank you again, I'll shut up now.
Baruch, did you have a question in between?
Yes, I did. Regarding the very upset, the new mobile design, because the mobile checker, the usability thing. So when I go to the mobile usability, it pops up, gives me a CAPTCHA. Every single URL, I have to, I get this CAPTCHA as opposed to the previous version. So, I mean, why? I mean, I'm logged in. Shouldn't you already see my IP? I'm not a robot, because it just keeps on asking. The CAPTCHA keeps on popping up every single page. And I can't download the Excel, because when I download the Excel sheet, it won't give me all the URLs that are not mobile friendly. It just gives me the total amount of the URLs that are not mobile friendly. Where before it just basically gave me all the URL paths. And then...
But that's a different tool, right?
No,
so
it's
I think
right in mobile usability. Mobile usability, when I go and I just, it says, 50 URLs are not mobile friendly, and I check, and then each and every one, before I click on the URL path, it'll give me like the CAPTCHA, and then the CAPTCHA pops up, says, you're not a robot, I have to, click on all the screen and the whole little pictures and stuff, and then it'll give me it'll tell me if the URL is broken or not.
Okay. I think the CAPTCHA is by design, because
I'm logged
that
in.
essentially pushes it through all of our pipelines, and we need to make sure that we don't cause any problems there. I suspect that's something where maybe we'll back off over time and see, well, the old one was too open, the new one is too restricted, maybe we have to find some kind of a middle ground.
Okay.
So that's something where I suspect it'll probably change over time. And I guess with regards to logged in and not logged in, that's something that can be scripted as well. So it's not quite that trivial.
Because what I'm seeing is like in the internal, when I'm logged in, I see that the URL is not mobile friendly, but when I go to Google Page Insights, it'll tell me that the mobile page is friendly. So I'm getting like also those errors as well.
If you're getting URLs that work in one but don't work in the other, I'd love to have some of those examples
Okay.
because that should be pretty consistent.
It'll
Should
tell
be.
me also internally, like on the non-Google page inside, like it'll tell me that, hey, you have 13 things that are blocked, which I already know because it's like internal things and so on. And then in the page insights, it'll say, okay, that page is friendly. Yeah, I'll send it over. Like.
Okay. Oh, with regards to roboted content, that would be normal for you to see a difference there
Yeah, yeah,
because the page speed insights doesn't check the robots text file. It's not, it's
exactly,
more
exactly.
like a browser, and the mobile friendly test in Search Console is more like Googlebot when it would be looking at the page where it would be blocked by content that's roboted.
Exactly, yeah.
All right. I don't know. You'll have to double check that you're really not a robot, I guess. I don't know. Maybe it's picking up some strange signals. You type too fast or something. I don't know.
He's a robot.
Oh, there you go. See, it was maybe picking that up. It's like,
I'm starting to
put it
print.
into a different room when you're working.
Okay, I'm starting to print things like you are.
Oh, awesome. Okay, are URL parameters section in Search Console a directive or a hint to Googlebot? They're more like a hint to Googlebot to kind of better understand what the URL structure is like. So specifically, we try every now and then to double check that the settings there are correct, that they kind of match our expectations. So we will every now and then check those. The question goes on, if I've specified a certain parameter is not to be crawled in the URL parameter section, do I still need to add them to the robot's text? So those are essentially different things. With regards to indexing, on the one hand, the URL parameter section helps us to better understand which pages could be folded together and index as one URL instead of as multiple URLs. And the robot's text file essentially prevents us from looking at those URLs at all. So specifically for normal duplicate content, if it's blocked by robots text, then we'll probably index those URLs individually without the content because we can't access it, but we don't know that we can fold those pages together. So if it's just a matter of duplicate content and not a matter of load on the server causing really problems for your server, then I'd recommend using the URL parameters tool instead of robots text. What's the best way to treat the switch currency parameter on the URL parameter section in Search Console? The only thing it does on our site is to change the currency. The language of the content stays the same. From my point of view, that's a pretty significant change, though. That's not something where it's essentially irrelevant to the page because depending on what you're searching, which location you're searching from, the currency might be pretty relevant there. So that's something where I wouldn't necessarily try to prevent that from being indexed separately, at least for most cases. So in particular, you would see this, for example, if you're searching for a product and you have a rich snippet shown in the search results where we sometimes list the price. If you suppress us from seeing the other currencies, then we wouldn't be able to show the price in that currency. So that's something that maybe makes sense to actually let us crawl and index those pages, maybe even set up an hreflang between those different page versions, even if they're all in the same language, but they're targeting different countries. Will Googlebot crawl links that only load when the user interacts? For example, if user clicks on tab on a page, the options are loaded in the tab with an AJAX request. The user selects an option, an on-click link, and the link is loaded to a button via data bind. Will Googlebot crawl that? So no, we won't be able to pick that up. The primary reason for that is that Googlebot doesn't click on all elements on a page to see what happens in the background. The one type of I guess, situation where we would be able to pick up some of the interaction stuff is if in the JavaScript file, the URL that is navigated to, like if you're navigating to a different URL with JavaScript and that JavaScript file is readable by Googlebot, then we might be able to pick out that URL in the file and say, oh, this is a new URL. Maybe we should go and crawl it. But we don't know if we should be passing PageRank to that, so we'd be treating that more like a no-follow link. And we probably have a hard time understanding what the context of that link is, like what the anchor text is supposed to be. So as much as possible, if you're navigating to different parts of content, then that's something where I'd make it as clear as possible to us that we should navigate there. And if you're loading additional content, just kind of keep in mind that this content won't be found in Google search results. So if it's really critical content to your pages, then maybe load it by default. Whereas if it's just auxiliary content, kind of secondary content to these pages, then maybe it doesn't really matter if it's not indexed at all. My mobile sites sit on a subdomain, m. Do I need to submit sitemaps, demote site links on the mobile accounts in Search Console, considering that I've already done this for the desktop account? So the normal way of setting up a mobile-friendly site on separate URLs would involve setting up a rel canonical from the mobile page to the desktop page. So if we pick that up properly, if we see that this is really the mobile alternate to this desktop page, then we'll focus on the desktop page for indexing and pretty much keep all of our signals there. So that's something where you wouldn't need to kind of submit sitemaps separately. You wouldn't need to demote site links or pretty much any of the other factors there separately for the separate mobile site. I'd still recommend adding it to Search Console because you'll get information about things like crawl errors, which might be fairly relevant if there's something that breaks on your mobile site that isn't broken on your desktop site. If Google crawls a page and sees two links, one URL followed and below the page the same URL no followed, how would Google react to that? I believe, at least at the moment, we would follow that link and treat it like a normal HTML link on a page and forward PageRank to that. The thing to kind of keep in mind with questions like this is this behavior can change over time. It's not something where we'd say, well, this is the defined way of handling this kind of situation, therefore it'll always be like this. It might happen that our engineers at some point realize, oh, it makes more sense to handle this in a subtly different way than we've done in the past, and then our algorithms will change to kind of reflect that. So it's kind of a theoretical question where at the moment we'll handle it like this, but it's not exactly defined in an exactly defined situation. So at some point that can change. From our point of view, when we look at these types of issues, usually we try to be reasonable and not just make changes randomly because we think it's a fun idea to change everything around. So if it makes sense for the web overall for us to treat it subtly differently, then we might do that. But if it ends up being pretty much the same afterwards, and we'll probably say, well, the change is so minimal or not visible at all, it's not worth keeping extra code in our systems to handle it in a different way. How widespread is the sneaky mobile redirects bug where you can't submit a reconsideration request? I don't know. I believe that kind of came up over the weekend or towards end of last week, and I haven't been paying attention to what exactly is happening there. I know the team is working on a fix for that, so hopefully that'll be resolved soon, but I don't know the size of the problem there. I've seen people every now and then kind of mention that, but I haven't seen a big lot of people who are affected by that, so I assume it's more of a niche issue. Does Google still require escape fragment solution to crawl Angular JavaScript, or is it able to crawl without the escape fragment solution implemented? Are you aware of a tool on the market which is able to crawl Angular JavaScript without escape fragment? So I don't know the specifics around how Angular is set up there, but as far as I know, you have the option of using either the kind of escape fragment setup with the hash bang, so the number sign and then the exclamation mark, or with using more normal type URLs where you use HTML5, history API navigation between those URLs. And from our point of view, we should be able to deal with both of those. We should be able to crawl and index the content on both of those. But we started moving away from the hashbang format, from the escape fragment URLs, and we recommend using more the normal-looking URLs. So I believe in Angular, that's just an option that you set, and then you move from the hashbang URLs to kind of the normal static-looking URLs, and with those, we can definitely pick up the content properly. Or let me say not definitely, but we should be able to at least pick up the content in most cases. So I wouldn't say that it's definitely always going to work, but I would say most cases, and you should probably use the fetch and render tool in Search Console to double check that we're actually able to pick these up. And a part of the move also is, from our point of view, that the Search Console tool doesn't support the hashbang URL, so you can't really debug those easily in Search Console. Whereas if you have normal static-looking URLs, then you can just plug those into Search Console, and they can be treated like a normal URL, anything else on a normal website. We've just launched websites in Canada, Australia, and South Africa. Am I allowed to use UK customers' product reviews across these new sites? We have hreflang in place. From our point of view, that's fine. If these are your reviews for your content, then that's something that you can put on these sites. What I would just caution away from doing is using automatic translation to translate them into other languages. So if you have these reviews in English and you open a site in French, for example, then you shouldn't use any kind of automatic translation tool to translate that content into French, because that automatically translated content is usually lower quality and would be something that the web spam team would see as auto-generated content, which would be against our webmaster guidelines. So within sites that use the same language, sure, you could also reuse it on the French site, but you should use it in the original language of the review. If a site has two folders, SERP landing pages, mydomain.com/health insurance, group of pages linking to this page, and /health insurance without a dash, group of pages, would you advise leaving it that way or combine all of the pages under, I guess, a single landing pages? If these pages are equivalent, then I'd recommend folding them together and just using one of those pages. I think that's, in general, the advice that I'd give. If you have multiple pages that are essentially equivalent, even if they're not 100% the same, then usually by folding them together into a single page, it's a lot easier to maintain. That single page can collect a lot more value because it's one page. We don't have to split it up into multiple pages, and it just makes things a lot easier for you. So if you have multiple pages that are essentially the same, multiple sites that are essentially the same, then probably you'd be better off by folding those together. Since when is it possible to use this method of hreflang? And it links to a Help Center article that's probably really long. It seems to say that it's now possible to upload one XML sitemap file to one domain which references all languages. I'd have to double check the article to look at, but in general, you can put hreflang markup into a sitemap file, and depending on how you submit the sitemap file, you could use one file for multiple domains. So, for example, if you submit a sitemap file with the robots text directive, then we will be able to use that even if it's hosted on a different domain than the website itself. So you could, for example, take different TLDs for different country versions, point them at one shared sitemap file or sitemap index file, and in there include all of the markup for those individual domains. So that would be possible, and that's something that theoretically has been possible since the beginning of sitemaps. Yes.
So can I just ask? Can I just mention something on XML sitemaps?
Sure.
So I use these custom. I use custom sitemaps. I've always used like custom sitemaps rather than those that are automatically generated within CMSs or whatever. Yeah. And there's you can only upload like 200 at a time and see them, because I had like 200 in an account, which seems like a lot, but I had an issue with sections of quite a big site that had potentially quite a lot of duplicates, so I wanted to sort of just narrow it all down into sections and see where the problems laid. But then that plan got foiled, because when I got to 200, it became you can't actually see the 200. It doesn't list them. It says that they're there, but then you have to start downloading the whole like spreadsheet to see what's in there. So just a bit of feedback, really. It might be worth putting on a maximum you can actually see is 200, because I had to sort of start again and then just bolt things together, and so it just was a bit annoying after I'd just generated like 200 sitemaps.
Yeah, 200 is a lot. But
I know,
yeah.
but it was a big site, and I just wanted to see where the problems were, and it wasn't that hard to build them, but then it's hard to sort of now have to fold them into sort of a logical kind of order, really.
Yeah, good point.
So I just thought I'd give that feedback, really. Okay, thanks.
Let's see. Is there any difference how the algorithm reacts if I include links in the main content area for users from my page to another page on the domain versus to a page on a different domain? Does the algorithm treat those links differently? I don't think so. I think those are normal links within the content. So I think basically the question is there a difference if I link to my own site or if I link to a different site? And as far as I know, we treat those links just like any other link. So that's not something that we'd handle differently. And for some sites, it's kind of mixed anyway, in that we've seen sites that use like a shared URL shortener for internal and external links. We've seen sites that use kind of an internal bounce thing to track links. So that's something where probably it wouldn't really make that much sense to separate the two. Would there be any negative SEO repercussions, double indexing or page ranking askew from having both HTTPS and HTTP working on a website for all pages? Probably not. So essentially what would happen there is we would crawl and index both of those versions, and we'd recognize that the content is equivalent, and we'd fold them together and pick one URL to kind of keep it as that and show it in the search results. So this is the same as having www and non-www. It's not something that's completely new to HTTP and HTTPS. We've kind of had to deal with this for a long time with different variations. Or some people have multiple domain names that essentially show exactly the same content. And even in situations like that, we have to crawl all of those different versions, recognize that these pages are the same, identical, and pick one of those URLs as a canonical and show that in the search results. So from an SEO point of view, in general, that's not something you'd really need to worry about. In practice, as an SEO, you probably have a strong opinion about which one you want to have shown in the search results. And it's good to have an opinion, but you should let us know about that as well. So use something like a rel canonical on these pages, use a redirect, and really let us know, this is the version I really want to have indexed. You can let us know all about these other versions, but you probably just want to let us know, well, this is the one Google should be focusing on.
So John, before Google processes this rel canonical, is there any chance that if that I go to HTTP in Search Console, see the same number of pages indexed in HTTPS, the same number of pages indexed? When I combine them, they are 2 times more indexed
That
until
that
that
could
they are
happen.
two. Okay, until Google processes rel canonical, and after it processes, then the same number will come up.
The same number, I mean, it'll settle down in that we'll pick one of these
Mhm.
URLs to kind of keep as a canonical. I
Mhm.
wouldn't go so far as to say the number will be exactly the same. I think there are always some fluctuations with regards to indexing, and sometimes we'll pick up some new content or content that freshly changed. So there's always something kind of moving around there, but I think over time you would see all of it kind of moving over to the canonical that you have specified.
Okay.
Is it true that if you change the entire content of a page but don't get any new links for that page, you won't see any changes in rankings, even though you have quality content? It's hard. I mean, you'll always see changes in rankings if you change the content of a page. So with regards to the general question of if you change something on your website and nobody links to it, kind of puts fresh new links to it, then that's not the case that we would kind of keep the rankings. We would change the rankings based on the content that we found there. And if we see that the content is vastly different, then we'll have to kind of rethink how we want to rank this page. But it's not something that we need to wait for any links to kind of trigger us reconsidering what we found on that site.
John, just on that point, I'm sorry, everybody. I hope you don't mind me asking these questions. I won't be here every week. I was reading something that talked about content. When you increase actually, it was a combination of two things. One was something in the patents that talked about if all of a sudden there's content on a page versus a coming soon page, the importance level of the page changes because obviously there's content there now. Yeah. And Gary, again, in that interview with, I know that I've really watched that a few times, he talked about the children of good quality pages. So if a page is, say, a really good quality category page, he talks about we're more likely to follow and trust the child pages down a certain path. And he gave the example of flowers, trees, etc. Yeah. So in effect, I kind of drew the conclusion that if you really work on building up the quality of the categories and the subcategories, the children would benefit almost because importance in that whole path may be increased. And he said that we're more likely to go down those crawl paths, we're more likely to follow that directory almost. Does that make sense?
So you're saying if a site increases the quality of the category pages, then we'd be more likely to look at the rest of the site?
Or not the rest of the site, the actual children of those. He gave an example, he talked about flowers and trees, etc. He said if you improve the quality of, say, trees, all the tree children may actually get visited more often because it's likely that Googlebot may think, oh, well, actually, this is quite a good quality section and we'll go down there, etc. So for me, I'm thinking, well, actually, and I just tested it recently on a couple of projects and found that actually, when you build up the quality of a category page so it's really highly relevant, almost that relevance is sort of passed down and you get just better. Well, I saw rankings jump up quite a lot actually in that whole category. So
yeah, I mean that kind of makes sense. That's essentially we recognize that the quality of that part of the site has improved, so we'll try to reflect that in the search results. So I think that would be kind of a normal change there. But that's, again, also not something that's tied to any links to those pages where we say, well...
I'm talking minus links, links relevant, just ultimately work on improving the category pages for the children to benefit almost, the child.
Sure, yeah. I mean, that kind of goes back to our ancient advice, which is kind of build a great website, right? So
Yeah. So it's like foundational stuff, really. It's
yeah,
revisiting some of the really good foundations.
exactly. Yeah.
John, did you guys ever bring keywords back, like back in the day? Like just like you do for Google News, where you can only add like 10 keywords. Would you ever bring keywords back? Or if you bring keywords back, you think the spammers will take over again?
We could do it as a joke just for SEOs.
Yes.
I
April 2017.
I don't think
Never.
we would use that for like ranking purposes,
Ever again.
because I mean they're still used in all kinds of sites kind of by default.
Yeah.
So it's not something where I think we'd get additional value out of being able to use those keyword meta tags there.
Yeah.
Speaking about messing with SEOs, could you potentially comment about all the tools going haywire when tracking the different search results and saying there's crazy weather in terms of algorithm updates? Because I personally don't see it. I doubt you see it in the forums. I don't see webmasters complaining that much about major algorithm updates, but the tools in the past week or so have been going nuts. Are you, not you, but you as in Google, messing with SEOs or SEO tools?
Yes, they are.
No, come on. I mean, we have a lot of like real work to do. We don't really have time to like figure out which tool is using which IP address and feed it some crazy data. I think that's probably not a good use of our time. I mean, from that point of view, I don't think there's anything crazy happening or conspiracy happening on our side where we'd say, well, we need to confuse people a little bit more. I think we confuse people enough by the normal things that we do, which sometimes we can just explain a little bit better to help kind of unconfuse people. But there's usually no need to confuse people on purpose. I think a lot of these tools might be picking up things that, from our point of view, might be like small algorithm changes, and just because of the way that they sample the search results when kind of compiling the weather reports, maybe they're kind of exaggerating one aspect here and kind of de-emphasizing another aspect here, where a normal webmaster, when they look at their search results, say, well, it's kind of all the same to me. These tools might be seeing like small shufflings happening and kind of bubbling that up as a different
I have an
value.
idea. Because you guys are already so transparent, because I have an idea, because everything is so transparent and, you know, a lot of the, you know, you're a spokesperson for Google, what about showing us behind the blinds, like the tool, not the algorithm, but the tool, like, hey, you know what, there's nothing really going on, you know, and just put that question, end that question once and for all, is where everybody's curious to see what tool you're using, you know?
I mean, there's always something happening.
Okay.
That's the hard part. I mean, there are always like changes happening in search, and we have a lot of people working on search to really continually improve it. And I don't know, what was the last number we gave out? Maybe 1,000 changes a year. Those changes, some of those might be visible as small blips in these tools, and depending on how the tools sample kind of the search results and the URLs they look at, they might see those blips a little bit more, or they might see them a little bit less. But still, the average webmaster, when they look at it, they see, well, it's kind of stable to me. Or the users, when they look at it, say, well, it's kind of the same as last week when I looked at it. They kind of might not realize the subtle changes that are improving the quality of the search results, at least from the way we look at it.
Right.
Oh, man. I saw that chat note. Is it true that, oh, we just looked at this one. One SEO guru told me that you can see when a user goes to my site and then clicks on affiliate links and goes to another site. Is that true? Do you use this in web search rankings? So I guess this kind of generally goes into the theme of Google doesn't like affiliate websites, which is absolutely not the case. So from our point of view, how you monetize your website is essentially up to you. We do expect websites to kind of provide unique and compelling value of their own. So if you're an affiliate website and you have great content on your site, and some of the products that people can kind of buy go to other people's websites to kind of complete that transaction, then from our point of view, that's perfectly fine. On the other hand, if you have an affiliate website and all you're doing is taking a feed of content and compiling that into web pages, and you're not really doing anything other than taking the feed from the source where you're getting it from, then from our point of view, it's kind of a waste of time to actually crawl and index your website, because we already have the original source indexed, most likely, or we have other affiliates who have a slightly better version of this content already indexed. So we try to focus on those. So it's not so much whether or not you have affiliate links on a site, but more a matter of, well, what kind of content are you providing? What's the value of your website compared to the whole rest of the web? And when you look at it like that, it's also important to keep in mind that there are sometimes lots of sites that are just as good as yours. So going into our forums or going to talk with other SEOs and saying, well, my website is just as good as the other websites on page 2, isn't really going to give you any advantages there. You really want to aim high. You want to make sure that, well, my website is the absolute best website of its kind and should be ranked #1 because it provides all of this additional value that's in addition to just those affiliate links. So instead of aiming to be just as good as some of the other affiliate sites that are indexed out there, make sure that you really aim to be significantly better than any of that other content. Does the addition of UTM codes to website addresses for local and national directory listings have a negative effect on NAP consistency and thus organic rankings? So I assume UTM codes, you mean the analytics tracking codes, tracking parameters that you can add to links. And in general, we can filter those out fairly well and kind of focus on the main URLs that's actually there. You can also let us know about that using the URL parameter handling tool in Search Console, where we can kind of learn from the input that you're giving us that these specific parameters are not meant to provide any additional information about that page. We have an add panel at the bottom of our main site pages, way beneath the fold. They're AJAX to reduce the load time. The AJAX URL is in robots to save crawler time, so Googlebot can't see it. It's a medium severity blocked resource. Is that OK to ignore? So the severity, I believe, is specific to the mobile-friendly testing tool, and it's specific to the amount of room on the whole page when we render it that this element would be taking up. So if this is something way on the bottom of your page and it's not content that you want to have indexed, then that's fine. I definitely keep it like that if it's an ad, if it's not something that you want to have indexed. On the other hand, if it's content you do want to have indexed or where there's something unique, then that's something where you probably want to fix that so that we can actually crawl and index that content. So as an example, one thing we've sometimes seen is businesses that have multiple locations might have those locations listed on a map. And if that map is in a section that's blocked by robots text, then we might not be able to recognize where the individual locations are because we might not have the addresses or phone numbers separately on the page somewhere. If they're only in that roboted block, then we wouldn't be able to pick that up.
Hi, John. Just a question on that. So when Google is looking at blocked resources, is it in any way looking for manipulative behavior? I mean, I asked that question, and it was just whether or not, again, ads very, very far down the screen. You've got to scroll, you've got to scroll, you've got to scroll right at the very bottom, very well labeled as external links, quite a small panel. But just in that particular example, it's just whether Google uses a blocked resource to say, hang on, are you trying to hide ads from us to make it look like, you know, we're doing something that we're not? So it's just to understand, can a site get penalized in any way from a blocked resources point of view, or is it purely kind of informational, just to simply tell you that, hang on a minute, you do know that Google's kind of not looking at your site properly?
For the most part, it's informational. I could imagine there might be some extreme situations where we would want to look at this from a web spam point of view as well. For example, if you load a giant overlay on your pages and it's completely different content and Googlebot's not able to pick up that content, then it's almost like cloaking. So that's kind of an extreme situation, but it's something that we do see every now and then, particularly on hacked sites, where they'll add some JavaScript, embed an iframe that's blocked by robots text, and essentially replaces the whole page with something completely different. And that's kind of more towards cloaking and not in the sense of, oh, they're using robots text in a kind of misleading way. So for the most part, if it's an ad block and it's blocked by robots text, for the most part, that's fine from our point of view. We don't need to see that content. It doesn't significantly change our view of the page when we render it. So that's not something I'd worry about.
But generally, I guess that if it's that kind of level, it would be a severity of high. If you've got low or mediums, is that kind of indicator that you don't really have to worry about any kind of penalization?
Yeah. I mean, you know your pages. So if you look at those screenshots that are generated and they're essentially the same or they're equivalent, then that's perfectly fine.
And does Google look at sites from a block resources point of view differently, for example, if they're hit by Panda or anything like that? So is it from a quality point of view, if it's trying to look at any manipulative cloaking type of behavior, would it kind of be a bit more kind of in-depth if a site was, say, Panda hit?
Probably not. I could imagine there might be some situations where the web spam team might pick up other signals and based on those signals kind of look at the site from a blocked resources point of view as well. But that's really more with regards to the more spammy type behavior and not something that you would accidentally trigger.
Okay, so more of a general contributor as opposed to a kind of one-off sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much. Cheers.
All right, we have 5 minutes left, so maybe I'll just open it up for questions from you all.
Well, speaking of Panda, I mean, can you tell us how many times at least a year Panda runs?
I don't know. It's kind of, as a part of our core algorithm, it just kind of runs regularly on its own. And since these updates don't come out in kind of a strong interval fashion, it just kind of goes from one to the next. It's not something where you'd see kind of the granular steps that there used to be.
So it's a random, kind of like a random.
I wouldn't call it random. I think they would like
random throughout the year, right? Like, you mean?
It's from what I know, it basically runs regularly.
Okay.
John, can I just ask one more quick question?
Sure.
Sorry. Do you remember that little test that we did the other week with the image thing, the plinky ploppity thing? Yeah, we had like an image and we tested to see whether Googlebot could actually see images, etc. So I ran a few more of those tests actually. I ran 4 because somebody sort of raised, oh well, actually it doesn't rank the image, it just indexes it. And even though loads of images populated that whole like image section of Google's image collection, and like 40 odd, 50 odd images came in because obviously Jen's and Barry's post, etc., and all the images from their pages came in. And I just wanted to sort of test it for myself, so I added 4 images then. One with the alt tag of the same name, one with alt and title tag on the image, one with just the file name of that, and just the original one, because I wanted to see which one actually won the race over time, you know, to see which, well, just to see really which one had maybe the most weight in it as such. But an interesting thing happened in that, you know, we've always kind of thought, well, images actually don't have much bearing on actually ranking web pages, yeah, the pages themselves. Loads of the pages started to appear in search for that term, actually, from that site. I'm talking 40, 50 pages, yeah? So that kind of makes me then think, well, you know, I kind of rant on a little bit about badges on some of the big sites that are out there, and I remember you saying, actually, badges don't really do much for these massive websites. They're not really doing them any favours, and that kind of struck me that without a single mention of a text word in any of those URLs from those 4 images, loads of the pages, the actual web pages, ranked. Yeah, so that makes me then think, well, actually, sites with badges on with optimized alt tags will actually be having quite a lot of benefit generally for getting their web pages ranked.
I think that's really hard to kind of come to that conclusion, because especially when you're looking at individual kind of separate sites that you would use for testing, they're very different from something that's kind of natural, like a normal website. So that's something where sometimes you'll see, especially when you're looking at ranking effects like that, you'll see things that go this way or that way, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it would have the same direction when you're looking at a natural website. So with indexing, it's a little bit different, because either it is indexed or it isn't indexed. But with ranking, there's a lot of room between different signals, and you can't really isolate one from all of the rest.
So even though there was no mention of that word in any text, it's still the page is still ranked.
I'd have to take a look at what specifically is happening there, but for the most part, these
other images from the site started to rank as well. So it's almost like Googlebot picked up on all the other images that were connected with that website and started to index all those images as well.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to take, especially when you're doing a test like this and you're looking at essentially a mix of different factors, and it's really hard to isolate one specific signal and say this is happening because of this specific thing that was done there. So that's really tricky.
John, can you quickly touch on the DMCA penalty thing? I just wanted to ask, so if a website submits a penalty and the other website, got hit and whatever, that page was removed and so on. So if they got, like, let's say more than 4 or 5 penalties, 4 or 5 removals that they had to do the other website because they copied the images and so on, so that site gets hit really hard. Like, suppose they're in e-commerce.
I don't know. I'd have to check with the team on that.
Okay.
The DMCA is always a bit tricky because it's essentially a legal action, so I don't know what the actual effect there would be.
We'll have to bring a intellectual property lawyer here.
John, can I ask one question?
Yes.
John, actually, I need to migrate my old domain to new domain, but because for last some months I have been seeing that Google provides a soft 404 type of errors if there is any content mismatch. So what I have planned is just to create a duplicate page first, and then use redirect one-to-one.
I
And
I
like the
try
same.
as much as possible. I try to follow the guidelines that we have in the Help Center for that. So I wouldn't try to kind of create intermediate pages for something like that.
Okay.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Okay, so this is very elementary compared to the rest of you guys. I'm a writer and not a tech person. We are starting a medical content library for local small medical practices that we'd like for them to be able to subscribe to and add the content to their websites. If we limit it to the number of subscribers per geographic area, are we going to run into duplicate content problems?
I don't think so. But if you have an example of what you'd like to do there, you can send me a note on Google+, and I can take a look there.
Oh, okay. Super. Thank you.
All right. With that, I need to head out. So it's been great having you here. Thanks for all of your questions. I'll try to get through some of the other questions as well and make sure that there's nothing crazy that I'm missing. But otherwise, I'll see you all again, I think, maybe on Friday, which will be, I guess Google I/O will be in between there, so I'm sure there'll be some exciting stuff happening this week. All right. See you all then. Have a good week.
Thank you,
Bye,
Roger.
everyone.
Thank you.